Alright, now that we got these two joints able to be slipped together, that of course is loose as of right now, we'll put cloth tape on the outside of it so that it'll actually grip onto it and fill in that gap and make a air closure. But for now, the next step is to get this head joint playable. And in order to do that, the first thing we're going to do is mark the embouchure hole. In order to do that, I believe that I make mine at 3 inches from the end of the flute. Yeah, about 3 inches. I am particularly double check things a lot when it comes to flute making and other things that I do. Even though I knew that it was 3 inches, I just wanted to be absolutely sure. Now, of course, your flute can be made like really close to the end, way farther down, and so on. You just have to adjust the size of the body of the flute in whatever direction you need to. But this is kind of where I find it comfortable, and what looks kind of nice, and what seems kind of familiar as far as the flute size goes from embouchure hole to the end of the flute. So once we have that hole marked, we're going to take a box cutter or some sort of sharp implement, and we are going to just make a pre-drilled hole. This makes it to where whenever I put it into the drill press, the drill has somewhere to line up. It has somewhere it's like, okay, I'm supposed to sit into here and then start drilling. As you can see, just make a little pre-drill, and then we're going to move on over to the drill itself. Alrighty, so the size drill bit that we're going to need is a 3/8 drill bit. Now, I bought this set at Harbor Freight, and it comes with the 29 pieces. You need like the 29-piece drill bit sets a lot of the time whenever you go to buy them, because they have all the little incremental ones that you need for flute making. You need to be pretty flexible as to how big or small you need to make your tone holes or embouchure holes. So where a 3/8 is pretty standard, but a 7/16 and a 17/64 and so on and so forth, like, you need some pretty incremental stuff. Now when it comes to drilling holes, I just wear safety glasses because it just creates some ribbons, but really no dust much at all. Got a nice 3/8 drilled hole, and we're going to go clean it up now. I'm just kind of removing some of the excess, and we're going to start shaping it into an oval. Some people, like, you could honestly just make it like this and maybe even just leave it like this and it'll play pretty good, but you want to make that wedge, as I said before. In my how to play flute video, there's a wedge that splits the two airwaves, and some of it goes on the outside, a lot of it goes on the inside, and it vibrates the flute. That's how you make sound, is vibrations. We're going to create that wedge, and I like a little bit more of an ovular shape. I feel like I find a little bit more emotion out of an ovular shape than just a standard circle. So we're going to go with that, even though technically just a standard circle is a little bit easier to find your embouchure in the beginning. But I do want to kind of future-proof for whenever you get better, it sounds a little bit better. But then again, if you want to request just this, that's totally fine. Or if you want to make this, that's absolutely fine too. So whenever I make an ovular embouchure hole, I usually make mine the length of about 1/2 inch. And now, you can see that my method using this sort of ruler is relatively guessing. I think I'm pretty close a lot of the time. But I don't think that I'm perfect. Maybe one day I'll be that way. As for right now, not so much. It's not that big. It's not that big a deal as far as I'm concerned. I still think they play really nicely, but I think this is something that I could probably improve on in the future. I'm not going to lie about that. So you can see this is marked at about 1/2 inch on each side. I'm going to start dragging this circular shape into an ovular shape with the Dremel. I'm going to start cutting the embouchure hole at an angle where you blow across it.
Alright, so what I'm doing here is taking a very pointed conical burr and taking the edge of the embouchure hole circle and dragging it down in order to make a point, in order to make that oval. Switching over to the other side, we're dragging that point down just a little bit and making it more ovular. Now you're going to have 4 corners that you have to grind down with this burr in order to make it a smooth embouchure hole. This is ovular. So we did 1 there, that's 2. So one side is a lot more ovular looking now. And there's 3. Now we got it pretty much all cleaned up and ready to go. Next up, what we're doing is making that angle, that wedge to split your airway. You don't want it to be just the way that it normally would be whenever you drill it in, so hopefully you can see that it's kind of angled now on this side comparatively to the back side, where it's just kind of straight up and down. So now we're going to do it to the other side in case a lefty player wants to play. And there you go, you have like a really relatively rough embouchure hole.
Next up, we're just going to clean it up a little bit by rasping the outside, not too much. Just getting kind of the sharp edges off of here. Cleaning it up just a little bit. Just want to get a nice clean edge. So it just rasped off a little bit of the excess, and as you can see, it's not a perfect kind of ovular shape. So I'm going to go at it just a little bit with my rasp and try and make it a little bit nicer looking. That actually did a lot right there. Cool. I think that we're just about good as far as the actual shape goes. And usually there's going to be a lot of dust buildup on your rasp, so I in particular will rub it on my knee, which I'm wearing pants, and don't rub it on just a straight up knee, and usually a lot of the dust just kind of comes off in that fashion. But we're going to clean it up a little bit more by going underneath. And do the same thing basically to the underside now. And any of the burr drill bit or Dremel bit that didn't really get a good clean shape, we're gonna go over that with the like kind of wedge shape that we did on the outside edges. Now what you want is you want that wedge to be right in the middle going across, because if you make it a slightly off center left or right, your embouchure is going to have to go slightly left or right. So you want the overall point of your embouchure to go down the middle. I've experienced this with a few flutes that I've made myself, so I try to be extra careful about that nowadays. They weren't bad sounding, that's for sure, but it just makes life a little bit easier when you don't have to pay attention to things like that. You can just play. Alright, we're going to go over the outside just a little bit one more time now that I kind of reshaped the oval. Not too much though. Just just a little bit. There we go. Now whenever it comes to a rasp, I bought this at Lowe's. It's one of their smaller sets. Now whenever it came to my workshop, basically, this point could kill someone. And as you see, I'm jabbing at this over and over again with my hand kind of near it, and sometimes I will miss the hole and stab into my finger. So I took a sanding Dremel bit and just sanded that down so that it was nice and round and not sharp in the slightest. I did the same with these little edges down here because these were kind of sharp, and sometimes I would grab onto this instead of the handle itself to get a better grip, or at least a closer, more focused grip. And while we have the rasp, we're going to go over the outside, or should I say inside edge here. Alright, and we're going to do the same to the joint edge here. Whenever you're done with cleaning all this up, you now technically have a playable flute, where you just put your hand on the end of the flute that is closest to the embouchure and blow across it. And then you can take it to the other side, just for the lefty players. And it plays perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. So next up, what we're going to do is, instead of using your hand, we're going to use a cork. We have to plug up this side of the flute somehow. And a lot of people do honestly use a cork, which is a great thing. But for me, I need cheap and really, really easy to work with, and one of the things that I really know how to work with is Eva foam because of my LARPing stuff. So I'm going to make a Eva foam plug. So this is a piece of Eva foam. This is something you can get from Harbor Freight. It's normally $8, but normally you can get like a coupon for 20% off. It usually ends up being around $6 or something like that. And you get a whole pack. And it's big, big pieces of foam, and you get to cut them up however you want. I need to make 3 circles out of it. In order to make a proper size circle, it's fairly easy. You grab a scrap piece of PVC pipe, you kind of jam it down just slightly, enough to mar the surface, and you get yourself a nice little circle there. So I'm going to make 3, and I think 3 wide is plenty enough to kind of replicate what a cork is lengthwise. There we go. You can use a box cutter for this method. I like to use scissors. My best friends are scissors, basically, so I have a pair of scissors on me at all times, so I just find it easy. Now, we have 3 pieces that we now need to make circular. You of course can use a box cutter, as I said before. What you don't want to do is cut exactly on the outside of this circle, because then it's going to fit in relatively perfectly, and it's not going to be a snug, tight fit. You need it to be snug, you need it to really seal in that air, not let any escape. So we're going to cut just outside of that outer circle, and it's going to compress into the flute. So we have 3 circles now. What we need to do is we need to stick them together. And in order to do that, the best method that I know of, especially via LARPing, is to put DAP in between the layers. So we're going to do that. DAP is a contact cement you can get at any hardware store like Home Depot and Lowe's and whatnot. They come in different sizes. Get the original. The gel is okay, but I prefer the original myself. I'm going to grab a mat that I use to dap on and such, which looks just awful, but that's the way it's supposed to. Use all sorts of primer and spray paint and whatnot on these kinds of surfaces. Here is a can of original DAP Wellwood contact cement. This is what I'm going to be using. Now some people like to just turn their DAP cans upside down and let the bottom rise to the top and therefore mix well. I kind of shake it around a little bit myself and then spin it, roll it in this way, and shake it again, so on and so forth. Now if you have a big can like me that is a big new can, it's all fresh and nice smelling, it's strong, so don't open that just right out, especially if you're going to be working on a bunch of flutes like I do, or LARPing gear. I put on a respirator for this. Now normally I'll use a piece of blue foam, but since you guys probably don't have blue foam because you're not LARPers most likely, I don't know, maybe you are. You can use blue foam, I prefer it, but you can honestly just use a spare piece of this Eva foam. We're going to do one of these on both sides. So you spread one of these on both sides, not too thick, not too thin. There's a little bit of a glob here, but that's fine. Brush it out. And then we're going to do one on the inside. Do it on the inside of this pattern here, setting it aside. And then we're doing one on the inside again. You can see whenever I do both sides, I'll prop one of them up against the can and the other two just laying on the bottom because these sides don't have DAP on them. Now these are going to dry for the next 10 minutes or so, and I don't mind moving them too much because they're already going to be like slightly dry, so it's not like going to drip onto anything. It's just as you're brushing it on, you may accidentally drip some onto your nice pad and whatnot. What we're going to do next is what is called a wedge in the embouchure while this dries for 10 minutes. Basically, in order to get to the second octave, in order for it to be in the correct tune, in the correct tuning, you need some sort of way to make this cylindrical object into a conical object. So, there's a few different ways that people do it. People usually like carve it into wood, and that's why you see simple system flutes that are made into a conical shape. It's because it gets that second octave really, really nice. In modern day concert flutes, you see that the head joint itself is conical and the body is cylindrical. So with this one in particular, we're going to do that same head joint method, but we're going to make it look real nice by having it still cylindrical looking, but still have that kind of conical shape on the inside by putting a wedge on the inside. The way that we do this is we take a 1/2 inch Schedule 40 piece of PVC pipe. So you're going to make something like this. It's a wedge shape. As you can see, it's cut most of the way down and it's pretty thin relatively, and it's 3 inches long. So we're going to take this 1/2 inch, where is it? There it is. Just give you an example of where to read it. It's 1/2 inch PVC Schedule 40 at 3 inches. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, like, oh, well, it's clearly a one-side wedge, and you got a full round piece of PVC here. Can't you make two out of that? And absolutely you can. And that's what I do. So I will be saving the second wedge for this for other flutes. Now this one we don't actually have to worry about removing the labeling on it because it's going to be going on the inside of the flute and the labeling is going to be glued down to the inside of the flute, so nobody's going to see it. It's not going to affect anybody. Okay. While I was bringing these guys out, these turned out to be pretty dry. You want them to be dry to the touch. You don't want any spots to be wet, and at that point you can stick them together. So I will do one of them to the other, pattern side to pattern side, and not really press down as of just yet, because we still got to press this one together. So we put pattern side to this dap side, which is smooth, so the double-sided dapped one goes in the middle, and the two with single side dapped go on the outside. You just squeeze them together. And as of right now, it's going to be pretty stout looking, but whenever it's compressed and shoved into the flute, it'll be pretty long, and it'll resemble a cork in a lot of ways. But we'll save this for later after we make the wedge.
So next up what I'm doing is just sawing that kind of wedge shaped in. This is honestly kind of dangerous to do it so close to my fingers, but I am actually very dexterous, so I feel relatively safe here. You might want to try and find a better way to do it. As you can see, I cut off sort of a wedge. It doesn't look just like the other one because we still got to sand it down to shape, but now we're going to do the back side so we're not wasting PVC pipe. Making a second wedge. Now I sped up this part because it takes quite a while, but I'm basically just sanding it down until it is a nice clean uniform shape and it's to the right height that you need it to be, which isn't that tall at all, honestly. So I'm sanding everything down because you can't get that kind of precise accuracy with just a bandsaw. I'm switching from one wedge to the other just because it heats up the PVC and it gets a little too hard to hold. And now I'm just cleaning it up with a piece of rubber that you can buy off of Harbor Freight so that you can get all the plastic out of your sandpaper and get it back to new. What happened just now is that I accidentally had it shoot into the belt sander, and I have to take it apart and get it back. Normally, whenever this happened, which this has happened maybe about 5 times since I've been doing this, it'll go in horizontally and it won't be all that damaged, and I can just go right back to sanding. But this time around, you'll see that whenever I get it taken apart, it actually went in vertically and ended up being destroyed. So luckily enough, we had 2 wedges to work with this time, so we'll just use the other one, of course. Now what I'm doing is actually making that flat part at the top more rounded so it'll fit in the PVC a little bit better, or fit in the head joint a little bit better, I should say.
Alright, so next we're going to actually end up putting the cork inside of the flute, which requires a little bit of lubrication, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how I do that. Alright, so in order to put the cork in, we got to dip it in some water. This will help because of the fact that there's probably going to be some residue of glue on the inside of here, trying to keep the cork from sliding inappropriately. I'll put it on the table. I put it on this mat so I don't get my table all wet. Not this mat, cutting board, should I say. I just kind of roll it in my hands. As you can see, it's compressed down a little bit. Just do it a little bit more. Maybe dip it in the water one more time. And then we'll shove it on in there. Alright. I'm going to start by putting an edge in and squishing it in there. And spinning as I do so. Now this is where one of those 3/4 inch dowel rods will come into play. Help out quite a bit. Just gonna put your body weight into it, and there we go. So, the cork is now in. But we need to put it in a certain amount in order for it to play properly. So for that, I got a long stick here. This is just a 1/2 inch dowel rod I happen to have. You can see I've marked it with a 3/4 of an inch, which is the width of the inner diameter of this head joint. And you insert it. Oh wow. Little did I know, I pretty much got right on the money. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. But normally you'd use this stick to push it that way, or you'd use your thumb or this stick to push it back this way in order to actually put it in the right place. And now we're going to insert our wedge, so the flat side is going to go towards the cork itself, and the round part of it, the back side, is going to go on the bottom of the embouchure for now. Where you honestly want it is more, you want it closer to the embouchure hole, somewhere around maybe, what would be like 8 o'clock-ish or so. You want it to be closer to your side of the embouchure hole. Where your chin would be, honestly. Sounds pretty good. And now we need to attach this to this, and we will have an assembled flute. In order to do that, we need to put some sort of material. A lot of people use cork. Again, I'm trying to be cheap and affordable around this area, so I'm going to put some grip tape. Honestly, just cloth tape with some glue on the back of it. I get this from Academy. I grab them in packs of like 6, I think. Costs like 14 bucks or something, and it covers a lot of flutes. So, I'm going to start with one end. I'm going to wrap it around. This one looks honestly kind of thin, so I'm going to wrap it around 3 times and see if that works. So that was the second. And here comes the third. Alright. Rip off the excess. And as you can see, I kind of overlapped the third layer just a little bit. I'm going to use my trusty scissors in order to cut off the excess. now we're going to slide it in. Yeah, it seems about right. If it just barely starts going in but still resists a little bit, then you have just about the right amount. You want it to be thicker, just like the cork is. You want it to be thicker than it should be to just slide in and out easily. You still need that airtight seal. So in order to do that, we use cork. We use cork grease. I just use the Gardinelli cork grease from Guitar Center. Very cheap, very nice. I bought like 15 of them on eBay or something for a very cheap price. So we just rub the cork grease on the cloth tape itself. And you use a pretty good amount, honestly. And as you use it, as it kind of wears in, it will become easier and easier to slide on and off. You gotta kind of strong arm it a little bit, kind of twist it back and forth so that it kind of gets used to its new way of life. And there we go.